Bonsoir à toutes et tous.
Good evening, everybody. Richard Loyen, General Delegate from Enerplan. So we're on the way to the first terawatt of PV generated in the world. And what are the opportunities for France? As you can see, as you saw earlier on, the best lies before us. And I just want to talk about the opportunities for France. We may be the daughter of solar energy thanks to Becquerel, but we are lagging behind the rest of the group. Now, Enerplans, the syndicate of solar energy professionals, our organization was set up in '83, and it covers all, Enerplan covers all renewable energies, the syndicate, sorry, but we are more especially focusing on solar energy. There's also solar heat as part of the value chain with all the ecosystem of the solar sector. And Enerplan is one of the voices, one of the stakeholders. Just to come back on my presentation. So the main strategic challenges in the short term and the long term that we could identify in France, and we could in fact extend to the rest of Europe. We have an industry which is globalized, innovative, and expanding fast. In other terms, now there have been some interesting rates in Europe, but today the industry, however, is much more global and is growing fast with a lot of investment. And it was reminded earlier on that PV, which has been recognized and promoted by the International Energy Agency, considers that PV is the new king of electricity generating in the coming years. So in future years, we will remain a leader. And why is this? Well, as it was explained, because of generation of electricity at a low cost. And we'll look at this more in detail, and there are other challenges. There are a number of problems to be addressed when it comes to going to market. Now, the objectives in France have been presented by Xavier. We won't attain the 20 gigawatts by 2023. We're not going to manage to attain that objective of connecting to the grid that amount of gigawatts. And we're wondering today as to whether we will attain the objective for 2028 between the low and the high end of the bracket, which is around 40 gigawatts. So how do we go from a market that has been for several years under a gigawatt to a market which should quickly go beyond 3 gigawatts per year as from 2023. There are a number of obstacles that are such as difficulty of accessing land, available land, and obtaining authorizations for construction. It's difficult to deploy projects within the procedures for call for tenders, even if these projects make it possible to have PV a little bit everywhere in France. Now, to reposition ourselves within the European market, we can see that the French market will have to go from roughly 10 gigawatts to 45 gigawatts by the end of the decade. on the European side would go from an annual market of 15 to 44 gigawatts. So we have a market which is at a European level is quite robust comparatively, and it justifies industrial scale investments to be able to deploy PV over the whole of the whole of the territory, whole of Europe. Now, what has now the COVID crisis has reminded us with the problem of masks and medicine and so on, but that has reminded us of the manufacturing problems or issues. To develop a market, it's difficult to develop a sector when you have to import materials. This poses problems, and we see captains of industry who are addressing this problem today with Solar has announced 2 to 4 gigawatts of production capacity. On the German side, we have manufacturers announced capacities of 4 to 6 gigawatts, whilst working with European manufacturers, so we can have a quarter or a third of industrial capacity in relation to the overall market is something which is absolutely feasible with products that are competitive. When you take into, and we will have to take into account more, the problem of transport and the carbon footprint caused by transport. So let's say this in general is good news for the European industry. Now, we have Ascarmore, who've received a prize in Germany for their thin film panels. So we're well positioned. And there's also been a show of interest by the Strategic Committee in France in the sector for the promotion of a number of projects. And there was a call for projects. There are roughly 150 projects that were put forward. For 100 applicants, for 150 projects that were presented for a call for projects, with a number of industrial projects and pilot projects. So it shows really how dynamic the industry is in France. The other thing for us is insertion in the network or the grid is one of the important aspects. And this one problem was adapting the French energy grid, electricity grid. In France, this is the case. We have processes, projection over 10 years, and where should we increase capacity? And how can we anticipate as much as possible special authorizations and planning authorization, construction permits and so on. This can take some time, 3 to 5 years. The development of the grid and all the smart systems that will be able to be integrated so as to better manage power requirements or power consumption and the generation of energy, over and beyond the problems of access to land and the cost of access to the grid that could be a hindrance to the competitivity of solar energy. And lastly, there's the problem of the electricity market. Today, since all of Europe will produce on the 15th of August a maximum of gigawatts, we will have prices that be very low. So we have a problem before us. And I'll hand over to my colleague.
So how can we increase capacity in order to meet demand, improve storage solutions, and better embed ourselves into the electricity market so we can manage facilities long term and also become independent from state subsidies. So these are market issues, subsidy related issues. It's a good idea. It's a good thing that we have examples today of particularly low competitive prices in terms of power generation. But if you compare power stations that make hundreds of megawatts in areas where access to the electricity grid is free of charge, and you compare the situation with other areas where you produce maybe dozens of megawatt and the circumstances are different and there's competition in terms of rent, you can't compare apples and oranges. And obviously, one bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, as they say. And there are power stations that are growing and that are emerging, even though they're not receiving any subsidies. It's an opportunity for individuals and entities to uh, produce their own energy and offset that against their own utility bill. We've heard a number of examples. Examples of our industry related challenges. Modules are one thing, but at this juncture, how can we create buildings that have an active envelope? EU regulations are key. There is a growing sense of aesthetics. People are increasingly aware. How do we ensure an active envelope for new builds? What about the active components for producing and manufacturing buildings? That's one of the challenges. Now, France is one of the countries where it is harder to develop building integrated PV solutions because under French regulation, um, builders have to provide a 10-year insurance policy in case there's a technical flaw in the building. So it's a difficult obstacle for new players entering the market. And what about efficiency of heat pumps that are in part fueled by solar? And also there are other market issues such as local flexibility. Now, what about at the level of the building or the neighborhood level or even at a high level? What about storage at those levels? These are solutions that need to be found. Now, strong or industrial challenges include BIPV, building integrated PV, positive energy buildings or BPOS, smart grids, smart solar charging. How do you ensure smart charging of electric vehicles? I saw Gaetan's picture earlier. Vehicles with PV technology. This will probably be or become a market niche. How do we put PV roofs on carports? How do we make it smart so that we use solar electrons as much as possible so as to reduce demands on the network, on the grid? So there are technology options available, and we're seeing a major ramp up at the EU level. in terms of storage technologies for batteries and also green hydrogen. What are we going to do in Europe on the electricity market when everybody can produce their own dozens of gigawatt? Everybody has their own installed capacity, and we have long sunny days from June until September, and we have more supply than demand. So there are excellent solutions out there. There are strictly PV related issues. And also power of networks, power of grids. This may require related technologies that are directly related to our issues. How can we do more PV and do it better? So we can develop and roll out our electricity grid. I include a couple of pictures taken in France. So solar tiles on the left-hand side. I talked about building envelopes and making sure they're active. Urban furniture as well, street furniture. This picture was taken in Côte d'Armor. And then LEDs that are active at night. This provides lighting in at nighttime and shading during the day using LED technology. See, PV can be pretty, can be self-sustaining, can ensure self-sufficiency, and we're able to reinvent the urban furniture that surrounds us. It's a significant and important source of electricity. It would make no sense to have to choose. So on the right-hand side, a shading facility, a carport. Now, the question is, how can solar combine with smart charging facilities for electric vehicles, whether in France or in Europe? We have ideas, we have good engineers, we have a lot of sunlight, we have excellent technology. So why not put these parking lots to use? They're sleeping in the sun, might as well put them to work, because we need to synergize in order to ensure self-sufficiency. To me, it's a priority for development. We're dealing with electrons, be they nuclear in nature, be they solar in nature. Do we really need to have a competition between the two? Isn't it all about ideology? Here we're talking about locally sourced, low carbon electrons that generate wealth, that reduce the CO2 footprint and generate. So 1 kilowatt means you can travel 10,000 kilometers. So why not make use of that technology? Thank you. Okay, other challenges ahead of us. This was touched upon earlier, local renewable energy communities. PV is the only technology that is sufficiently decentralized to be owned and taken over by citizens. So individual homes get to generate their own power, but this can be done at the neighborhood level, at the village level, at the conurbation level. So the energy transition is something that citizens are now owning, and it's a good idea, and it's a smart and wonderful development. So over and beyond producing your own electricity to be able to use it, remember the whole challenge of agri-photovoltaic communities. I include a few pictures. Now, these are technologies that are mature. There are others that are more emerging, that are more innovative. Obviously, government services may have cold feet at the moment. We can easily understand why. And they're allowing these experiments to take place only on a case-by-case basis, drip by drip. So what we need is a deal changer in terms of land use, so we can have more solar farms and more PV in our countryside. And also recycling is another challenge. From cradle to grave, isn't it? So we need to handle this technology all the way until the end of its life and confirm that we are truly compatible with the energy transition. So we've talked a lot about Europe. We've talked a lot about France, but we and I are spoiled brats. We push a button and the light comes on. Not everybody has that luxury. Let's remember that around the world there are nearly 800 million people who have no access to electricity in 2020. That's 13% of the global population. And PV is going to change their lives over the next 10 years, assuming we're all hands on deck. And nearly 3 billion people depend on firewood or coal to make food and be able to eat food every day. Again, PV is a good solution for them. So we need to ensure a low carbon economy in OECD countries and in fast growing countries. But what about the rest of humanity? They're not on the bandwagon yet, and they're still in the shade and they need lights. So let's bring it to them. There was a white paper written on this. How do we implement Sustainable Development Goal number 7 of the United Nations in order to ensure universal access to clean and affordable energy by 2030? So how do we make our contribution to achieving this SDG? Thank you very much. I'm done.
So thank you, Richard, for this nice presentation. I think we have seen once more what are the opportunities for photovoltaics in the future. We are not at the end, we are just starting. And I think that's a really good message, which we heard all over the day today. We've seen in several presentations that there are a lot of new research options, ways to go. But on the other hand, we are still at a relatively low cost for photovoltaics electricity generation, but we have to implement it into the system that we can provide electricity for every minute during the day and night. And there are a lot of things we have to do, but it's very clear that photovoltaic will be the main pillar for that. And if we see just here what we can do also for people who have no electricity at all for the moment, I mean, there is a lot of things to do. So with that, thanks to the speakers, we are just in time and finish this session on the deployment. And I hand over to Daniel. Thanks again.